I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again.
Welcome back to the Fire and Rain conversation series. We're feeling super inspired by our last two conversations. We've had great advice and wisdom from experts in their fields and more ancient wisdom to ground us and help us think more deeply about ways forward.
This week, we're hearing from those who have lived through a bushfire. And just a warning that some listeners may find this discussion distressing. If you need support, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. It's available 24 hours a day.
As we know, last summer, Australia experienced one of the worst bushfire seasons in its history. More than 19 million hectares were lost, along with over 1 billion animals, around 3,000 homes, 33 lives, including 9 firefighters, and it lasted many months. 5 years ago, in Wye River, a fire burned 2,500 hectares. 109 houses were lost, and the fire lasted 34 days. Fortunately, no lives were lost.
Today, our guests are from Wye River and Mallacoota, and they have very kindly agreed to chat with us about their experiences of living through the fires. Roy, it's been 5 years since the fires in Wye River. What would you describe as the biggest impacts of the fire at the time?
I think the biggest impact was the sheer loss of houses and the bush. And I think for Wye River homeowners and holiday makers, it's the bush that really draws them here, you know, the bush coming down to the sea. But yeah, just to see the stark hills, I think was probably one of the biggest impacts that I noticed.
And Yvonne, can you talk about some of the impacts, whether they were psychological, financial, social?
All of the above. Not so much personally for me, but certainly for many members of our community, resident and non-resident. We saw these mental issues and physical issues manifesting right from the start. I was lucky. I was able to continue my life in Wye River until my home was rebuilt, but it wasn't so easy for non-resident property owners. It was more complicated for them to visit this place, and they almost seemed more distressed than us residents. But I guess we were living the recovery and they could only watch from afar.
And Roy, you were the CFA captain at the time. You obviously worked really closely with the community. Can you talk about the event and then also what happened in the immediate sort of months after that?
Yes, well, because the fire was already in the landscape, like one for a week before it hit Wye River, we did have plenty of warning that this could possibly happen. And we did have plans in place if a bushfire ever struck Wye River, and so our major aim was to protect the major assets, which would then help with the recovery of Wye River. But I think the word recovery to us was just a word at the time, and we're thinking, oh yeah, well, we're going to have a shop and we're going to have this and recover with, and recovery's been the hardest part of the whole thing, really. The fire itself was kind of over in not much more than a day, really, for Wye River itself, but it's the recovery's still going now.
Yeah. Yvonne, you talked about that the other day when we chatted about some of the things that have stuck with you since the fire. Can you give us a sense of what they were?
We were very fortunate that no lives were lost in that fire, but the community did mourn the environmental damage. Of course, we lost our houses, but that was, we eventually were able to take control of that. But many people mourned the environmental damage, the wildlife and the forest, which we knew would take years to recover. The trees that were lost were a big source of stress for many people, including the ones that were subsequently assessed as dangerous, and the felling of which, you know, meant the constant sound of chainsaws, which was most distressing. Getting together and talking, keeping the community together, sharing experiences was a very important part of our recovery. It wasn't that difficult to do. You just held a few lunches, a few barbecues. You organised them so that it didn't matter how many people came. There was room for everyone, and it just worked, and we felt it was very important to keep our community connected.
Yeah, you were mentioning that everyone reacted differently. So
yes, that's some experienced prolonged distress at the loss of their home, and you talk to them and you would feel powerless as to what you could do to help them. All you could do was urge them to seek out professional help that was available. But others just quietly got on with what they had to do. We had a lot of help. We weren't alone. There was a lot of support out there. And it was amazing how, as I say, how some people coped well and other people didn't. And it was, I hate to use that word distressing, but it was distressing that you really felt powerless as to what you could really do to make things easier for them.
Roy, did you find the same? Did you have experiences of?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think that, and sometimes it was the ones that you were least expecting to be distressed that were more distressed, and you know, like we did. I think we connected with the community pretty well with holding, like Yvonne said, the barbecue gatherings and, you know, lunches and fundraisers. And just in general, we had meetings. You know, EMB supported us very well with that sort of thing. But you just found that sometimes, and it was really hard for me, I suppose, because I haven't lost a house, and so I don't fully know what I might have lost 109, but I really I haven't lost my own personal house, you know. So it was difficult for me. I had to bite my tongue, you know, quite a bit because I could see one lot going through what I considered was worse than somebody else that was not handling it as well. But that's just different people with different horses, different courses. And
could you give us a bit of an overview of the impacts of the fire on yourself?
Yeah, I think I still fully don't grasp the extent of the impacts. I think I'm still sort of figuring that out a little bit. But initially there's that sort of a loss of everything, and, you know, try and get your head around, you've got material things which can be easily replaced, but then like all those other things, they sort of pop into your mind over time. You forget about them and you're like, oh yeah, I don't have that anymore, you know. So that's sort of one of the things that I've been grappling with since the house burnt down. I think psychologically, the nightmares and things, you know, for me, I don't know whether it was the same for anyone else, but just for a long time, just had these intermittent nightmares about my stuff burning. And even when I was awake and those things are coming to my head, you know, I just think of something and then I picture it burning. And I don't know why I was doing that. It was kind of weird, but it was just like I couldn't think of my things without picturing them burning, you know. I suppose the other thing sort of I was thinking about while the other two were talking was just that I felt a real loss of control of freedom. I couldn't go places, couldn't get back to my house. I couldn't connect with my work. I couldn't go back to work because I couldn't get there. I couldn't meet my friends or anyone else affected in the community, you know, so that I found that sort of isolation and just I had no control over my life because it was still a very active fire environment for a long time. So I think that was quite a big impact, and still, you know, with COVID, it still is a big impact on me.
Yeah, it's the double whammy, which is devastating for many up the east coast of Australia. What would be the top 3 things that have stuck with you since the fire, Em?
Probably the top thing for me is just no matter how bad the outlook was, I found that many people were still choosing to hope for the best. We were getting told we're going to have horrible weather, you know, we've got fires everywhere, you know, all of these things could happen, and people were still sort of going, well, let's just hope that that's not the outcome, rather than actually planning for that. You know, some people were, but I was around a lot of, because I was out of Mallacoota, I was around a lot of tourists, and I felt like they were really resisting that sort of, you know, the instructions to leave the area. They didn't want to wreck their holiday, so they were just really resisting changing their plans. That was one of the things. I think humans are amazing. You know, I saw so much goodwill. I had so much generosity shown to me. You know, we were given a house, clothing, food. You know, the first day of the fires, we hadn't eaten all day, and somehow some fish and chip shop turns up and gives you some dinner, you know, and it was just so many things like that. So I think that was another thing. And just the people that donated money throughout these fires. It's just been incredible human spirit, and that's been a really wonderful thing. And I think the other thing that's really struck me is how slowly things happen after fires. You know, initially it was many days before I felt safe, like probably 10 days, you know. It was a long time before I could get back to my community. It was a month before I could get back to Mallacoota and to my friends there, you know. It can be a long time before roads are open and water is available again, or power, you know, the services are restored. And we only had a house cleaned up 2 weeks ago, so that's 5.5 months. And I think people really need to be aware of that, you know. It can take a really long time. Everything happens slowly, and as the others said, you know, they're still in recovery. So.
Yeah, 5 years on.
Yeah.
We just, you know, it's hard for us. We've not experienced a fire here in Forest, or in sort of since the last 100 years. And you just try to mentally prepare, and you've all sort of talked about that in the idea of, you know, community preparation. But perhaps back to you, Yvonne and Roy, what are your thoughts and recommendations for communities like ours, so how we can get better prepared?
Look, I think that obviously you're already on the right track by doing what you're doing right now, and I think that that whatever your community body is, engages with the CFA, and you work together, or you just involve them so that both of you know what you're aiming for, I suppose. The CFA may already have a plan, I don't know. You know, Forest being quite a bit different to Wye River, we can't get hit by fire from almost 180 degrees, whereas Forest's surrounded by bush. You know, the realisation that a fire can come at you from any direction, and it's even if you're working towards getting a neighbourhood safer place, you might be in one of those places where that's not available to you because you're cut off because of the direction of the fire from there. So knowing the fire direction, having different plans for what side of town you're on when a fire is coming from, you know, the opposite side or the same side as you that's cutting you off. They're all kind of important. They're all important things for the residents or the community to understand, you know. Yeah, but I think that's the main thing, is that you're getting together and talking, and if everybody knows what's going to happen on each different scenario, then you're halfway there, I think. But yeah, trying to engage the whole community is the hardest part. I think be realistic in assessing your home and its probability of surviving a fire. So yeah, like if it doesn't look like surviving a fire, don't stay there and try and defend it and put yourself at risk, as well as put the emergency services at risk too, who feel like they might have an obligation to go there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yvonne, do you have some suggestions, recommendations for us?
First of all, I'd like to say to Emma, yes, we know how you're feeling right now. Get ready for your town not to be your own for quite a while. Get ready to have heavy vehicles going through your town, clearing away debris and doing whatever else has to be done. It can be annoying, it can be frustrating, but it's the start of your recovery. That's what you've got to remember. Things are starting to happen for your recovery. As far as preparation goes, we all get a lot of advice about how to keep ourselves safe in the bushfire, not to be there, etc., etc. But for me, my recovery was founded on being adequately insured. Please, adequate insurance is mandatory, especially if you lose your home. Do your homework and make sure your insurance cover will pay for the cost of rebuilding your home. It might be much more expensive than you think. Certainly down here, as Roy well knows, we have to consider bushfire attack level regulations, which make it more expensive. If you have to have water and septic facilities, if you don't have them available to your property, there might be terrain issues. There's a premium cost at transporting building materials. And then there are the legal requirements and regulations. Knowing you won't be homeless, knowing that you will get your house back eventually, saves a lot of sleepless nights. And I can look out my window and see my neighbours across the road. They're able to rebuild at last. Or I can look out my other window and I can see the vacant block at the end of the road, which was with a family, owned by a family for generations. But the blocks had to be sold because their house wasn't adequately insured. It's not just the value of your house, particularly if it's more than 10 years old. It's actually what it's going to be cost to rebuild it. And to me, it was such great peace of mind for me that I knew. I didn't have to wake up in the night doing those sums. Can I afford this? Can I afford that? I knew it was all covered, and that can save a lot of stress. I think you have to be mindful that if you live in a place with trees, in a forest, that it can happen every summer. You have to think, is this going to be a year? You don't need to be maudlin about it, but you just have to know that there is a possibility of it happening. And when it does, try not to be too surprised. And then you have to think about the practicalities that you might need in place if you do lose your home. It's easier to cope if you know you can rely on family and friends to accommodate you as long as necessary. There are plans put in place to find somewhere for you to stay, all of that, all the agencies and support services kick in. But it gives you greater peace of mind if you know where you can go with your pets as well, because sometimes worrying about them can be more stressful than worrying about yourself. Also, we all know about our emergency boxes with our documents in and all of that, so that we take with us if we're leaving in a hurry. But it mightn't hurt to have a little plan B for that if you are away and all at once it happens and you can't rescue these things. Maybe a few electronic or paper copies of those with your family or your friends, which might seem like overkill, but honestly, when you start having to make those phone calls, it's much easier for you if you do have particularly your insurance details, your banking details. They're just little practical things that can make it easier for you to get going and start thinking about the other things you have to do.
Thanks, Yvonne. They are really awesome tips. Thank you very much for those.
You're welcome.
Emma, that's wonderful. Emma, what would you recommend based on your experience?
Probably similar to the others, but yeah, just make a plan, but be comfortable with that plan because you have to live with it at the end of the day. And I don't know how many stories I heard when I was in relief centres that, there was one lovely lady, probably in her 70s, they had a plan to leave and then her husband wouldn't. And she left him, in Tathra, and she didn't know when she was going to be able to get back. So they had the plan, but then he's like, nah, I'm going to be okay, and wanted to stay. And they were okay in the end, and the house was okay. And he probably, put out embers and things. It wasn't under serious attack there, but yeah, just I saw so many times, and even I experienced that a little bit. I thought I'd do one thing, and then in that moment I couldn't do that thing. So you really have to be comfortable with your plans and the fact that other people have a will, and it's not just you making your decision. Often it's other people making decisions with. Once again, insurance. I think, make sure you've got that all sorted, but I don't think all insurance companies are created equal. And certainly in Mallacoota, there were some that were amazing and did it above and beyond. I've heard stories of them, people that were underinsured, they upped their insurance coverage for them and things like that. And then some of the ones that were perhaps not so good, you can do a bit of a Google search and find out that maybe they weren't so good at Wye River either, and in other places. So that I think that's something for people to have a think about. It's not just that you're covered, but it's just the reputation and past behaviour of those insurance companies. And probably the other thing is just learning to accept help, like lean in on people. It feels really funny. I'm a professional, I'm pretty independent. I don't really ask for anything from people, but you have to in these circumstances, and when I was unable to be near any friends or family for a month, there were just some complete strangers that felt a bit funny to accept help from, but they were just wonderful, so I think lean in whenever you can. So that's probably my third bit of advice.
We like to try to finish on a little bit of an encouraging note with our conversations and to ask people what gives you hope. So it's probably easier for you, Yvonne and Roy, after 5 years now of reflection. Do you want to kick off with your thoughts on what gives you hope?
Well, I think what gives me hope is people, the way they stand up and do, help out. There were some incredible people down here at these fires, but probably other things that give me hope is the way that I think finally we're recognising climate change, or not just we, but there's some, CFA and parks have certainly recognised, recognised climate change for some time now, I think. But
thank you. Yvonne, do you have some suggestions, recommendations for us?
Almost 5 years has gone by. We've had to be patient, but our environment is much recovered. The trees are filling in. My view is gradually becoming filtered as it was before. There's wildlife in the trees. The black cockies have been feasting on the hakea, which survived the bushfire at the front of my house. So it's all coming back. My street and my neighbourhood is just about restored with rebuilt and new houses, and life has gone on. The community has gone on and mostly stayed intact. I want to tell you, if it happens to you, it does take a while to recover. You have to be patient, but it does happen. And as we did, and many before us, you will get there step by step. And perhaps after such a loss, we all the more appreciate and value the precious place that we've chosen to live more than ever. But there is hope, there's a lot of help, and recovery will happen in time.
Beautiful. Thanks, Yvonne. That's lovely. And Emma, what gives you hope?
Probably the same thing for me. What hurt me the most was just the environment and that loss of nature. That was absolutely devastating, and I couldn't for a while have any hope that it was going to come back. And just, you know, every time I'm in Mallacoota, where I don't live anymore, but every time I go back down there into any of the fire affected areas, you know, you see the bush coming back, a few more plants coming back. On Facebook, I'm seeing more and more pictures of birds back in Mallacoota, it's an amazing place for birds. And, you know, when I first returned to the house, it was completely silent, which was weird. And I just was broken by that. I just thought, it can't come back. This is too much, but it is, and it's amazing. And yeah, the human side of things, I only remember this sort of as we were going on, but a person that helped me, that gave me the first place to stay in Maringula, was actually related to the man from Wye River. So it was your cousin. And it was Sharon, her name was. She was just this lady, and she gave me a hug and said, come and stay at my place. And Roy, it's your cousin. So I remembered that while we were talking. She goes,
wow.
Oh, yeah, I've got a cousin from down there. And so anyway, yeah, she helped me and just gave me a place to stay, you know, with the dog when you weren't supposed to have dogs and stuff. So I think humans are, you just sort of drop your guard and just forget about all that social stuff and just be really human in these situations. And I think it's really important to do that sometimes. I think we forget about doing that a lot and get mixed up in all kinds of things. At the end of the day, you know, we're all people, we need to help each other. So I've seen a lot of that lately, and it's really positive. So
that's beautiful, Emma. Thank you. And it's so relevant for now, with in the midst of the coronavirus as well. It's so relevant for any emergency and crisis that we're having. Thank you. Let's check out we really appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you so much. We appreciate it's not easy discussing these events, and we also appreciate on the side, we appreciate it may not be easy for some listeners to hear, and if you've found any of this conversation upsetting, please remember you can always call that lifeline 131144. Sorry, 131114.
If you have any thoughts on this episode or any others in the series, please let us know via our website at fireandrainconversations.org, Next episode, we'll be speaking in more detail about the psychological and health impacts, as we've heard about today, more broadly, and how the effect of bushfires has on people's lives. So we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
But I always thought that I'd see you again.